You know that feeling when your heart just stops? That's what happened when I saw my own name on a bank account, one I never opened, and a list of withdrawals I never made. For 10 years, I thought my son was helping me. Turns out, he was helping himself. My name is Linda Hayes. I'm 62 years old, a widow, and for the past decade, I've trusted my only son, Mark, with everything: my home, my savings, even my passwords. After my husband passed, I wasn't just grieving a partner. I was learning how to survive alone. Mark promised he'd take care of me. "Mom, don't worry about anything. I got you." I believed him. But when I walked into that bank on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I realized just how much that trust had cost me. My name is Linda Hayes, and if you met me a few years ago, you'd probably think I was one of those mothers who couldn't stop bragging about her son. I was. For most of my life, I believed that Mark was my biggest blessing, the kind of son every mother dreams of having. He was smart, polite, charming, and responsible. When my husband, David, passed away 10 years ago, Mark became my anchor. Or at least, that's what I thought. Losing David shattered me. We'd been married for 38 years. I met him when I was 22, right after college, and we built a life together from scratch. We weren't rich, but we were happy. David worked in construction management, and I taught elementary school for nearly 3 decades. We raised Mark in a modest 3-bedroom house on the edge of Dallas, and we poured everything into him: time, love, money, dreams. When David died from a sudden heart attack, it felt like the world collapsed overnight. I remember standing in our kitchen that morning, coffee mug in hand, when the phone rang. A nurse's voice told me to come to the hospital immediately. My knees gave out before she even finished the sentence. By the time I reached the ER, he was gone. Just like that. One minute he was laughing at breakfast, the next I was a widow. Mark was the one who held me up. He came over that evening, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and whispered, "Mom, you don't have to worry about anything. I'll handle it." I remember nodding through tears, clinging to those words like they were a lifeline. At the funeral, he took care of the arrangements, spoke to the insurance company, handled the bills, and comforted me through the nights when I couldn't sleep. Over time, he became my everything, my emotional support, my financial advisor, and my only family. I didn't realize how dangerous that was. Mark had always been good with money. After college, he worked in accounting and later started a small consulting business. When I retired, he offered to help manage my savings and David's life insurance. "You should enjoy your retirement, Mom," he said. "Let me deal with the boring stuff." He set up online accounts, automatic payments, and monthly transfers. He explained things in simple terms and promised everything was under control. And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? For the first few years, everything seemed fine. My bills were paid, my credit card worked, and whenever I needed money, Mark would handle it. He even took me on small weekend trips, once to Santa Fe, once to Nashville. He'd smile and say, "You deserve this, Mom." I was proud of him. I'd tell my friends, "Mark takes care of everything. He's such a good boy." They'd smile, maybe a little jealous, because not every child looks after their parents like that. But little by little, I started to notice changes. It began with his tone. He became controlling in subtle ways. If I asked about money, he'd sigh, "Mom, I told you, I've got it. You don't need to stress about these things." When I mentioned wanting to buy something for the house, he'd say, "Let's wait until next month, okay? You don't want to dip into your savings." It sounded like he was protecting me, but underneath that care was something else: authority. He was the one making decisions. I was just supposed to nod. At first, I ignored it. After all, he'd been through a lot too. Losing his father had changed him. He became more serious, more ambitious. I thought he was just under pressure from work. But then, there were moments that didn't sit right. Like when he bought a new car, a shiny black BMW. He brushed it off as a business expense. Or when I found out he'd gone to Las Vegas for a weekend conference. I remember teasing him. I thought accountants were boring, and he laughed. But something in his eyes flickered guilt, maybe. Still, I pushed away my doubts. He was my son. My only son. I'd rather question myself than him. There were small red flags too. Letters I wasn't supposed to see. Phone calls that ended when I walked into the room. Passwords that had to stay private. When I once asked to see a bank statement, he told me it was all online and that I wouldn't understand the layout. I didn't want to admit it, but somewhere deep inside, I started feeling small, like a guest in my own life. I remember a Sunday afternoon when I told him I wanted to donate some money to the local library for a new reading program. He smiled, but his tone was dismissive. "Mom, that's sweet, but let's focus on your future first, okay?" It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like I was a child asking for candy instead of a grown woman who'd worked 40 years as a teacher. A week later, I overheard him on the phone in my kitchen. He didn't know I was home early. His voice was low, sharp, impatient. "No, I told you, I'll send the payment after she transfers it. Just chill, okay?" When he saw me, he hung up quickly and smiled too wide. "Hey, Mom, you're home early." Something in my stomach twisted that day, but I didn't confront him, because confrontation meant facing the possibility that he wasn't who I thought he was. I wanted to hold on to the illusion that my son was still my protector, that the little boy who used to hold my hand while crossing the street hadn't turned into a stranger. You know, when people talk about betrayal, they make it sound dramatic, like screaming, fights, broken things. But betrayal often starts quietly. It's in the sighs, the small lies, the shifts in tone you pretend not to hear. It's the erosion of trust you don't even feel until it's gone. Looking back, I see how blind I was. I handed him my bank documents, my credit cards, even my will. He told me he was creating a financial safety plan. He said it'd protect me if anything happened. He used words like portfolio diversification and asset management phrases that made me feel safe because they sounded smart. But what he was really doing was building a wall between me and my own money. And I let him. I used to tell myself that's what family was, trust without question. I told my friends, Mark's like his father, honest to the bone. The irony still burns. If you'd asked me back then what my biggest fear was, I'd say loneliness. I never imagined my biggest fear would be my own child. By the time I realized something was wrong, he had already taken control of everything. He had my account information, my online logins, and every financial statement redirected to his address. When I asked for copies, he said, "It's all digital now, Mom. I'll handle it." It's strange, isn't it? How easily love can become blindness. How someone you die for can quietly take everything from you, not just money, but your confidence, your sense of safety, your faith in your own judgment. That's what Mark did to me. I told myself it was just how things worked now, that I didn't need to worry about modern banking or investments. But deep down, there was a little voice whispering that something wasn't right. I silenced it every time until the day I couldn't anymore. That day came unexpectedly. A random afternoon, a simple errand, and a truth that would change everything I believed about my son, my marriage, and myself. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of day where nothing special is supposed to happen. Quiet, sunny, ordinary. I remember it clearly because I'd just come back from my morning walk, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened the mail. There was a letter from my homeowner's insurance company asking for a signature update. Simple enough, right? So, I decided to go to the bank to verify my contact details and make sure all my paperwork matched. That's all it was supposed to be, a 15-minute errand. I drove to the branch I'd been using for over 20 years, the same one David and I opened our first joint account in, back when our hair was darker and life was simpler, the same place where the tellers used to know us by name. When I walked inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, and the hum of the printers mixed with the low murmur of customers. I smiled at the young woman behind the counter. Her name tag said Jasmine. "Good afternoon," I said. "I need to update my phone number and check something on my account." "Of course, ma'am," she said, cheerful and polite. "Can I see your ID?" I handed it over, and she typed my name into the system. Then her eyebrows furrowed just slightly, so quickly that most people wouldn't have noticed. But after teaching for 30 years, you learn to read faces. She asked, "Which account, Mrs. Hayes?" I blinked. "What do you mean, which account?" She turned the monitor slightly toward me. "You have 2 accounts under your name, a checking and a savings." I frowned. "I only have 1 checking account. My husband and I closed the savings years ago." She hesitated. "Well, ma'am, there's another account listed here opened 8 years ago, joint ownership between you and Mark Hayes." At first, I didn't understand what she was saying. My mind tried to find an explanation that made sense. "Oh, that must be his business account," I said quickly. "He probably used my name by mistake." But Jasmine shook her head gently. "It's not a business account, Mrs. Hayes. It's personal. Your name is primary." My mouth went dry. "Primary?" "Yes, ma'am. Meaning it's under your Social Security number. The joint holder, Mark Hayes, is secondary." I stared at the screen, feeling a rush of confusion that turned into something colder. "Can you show me the statement history?" "Sure," she said, her tone cautious now. She clicked a few times, and the screen filled with rows of transactions. Withdrawals, transfers, payments. My eyes scanned down the list, and then I froze. There were large withdrawals, 2,000 here, 5,000 there, sometimes 10, regularly, for years. And next to every withdrawal was one detail that hit me like a punch to the chest. Authorized by Mark Hayes. My son's name, my signature, my money. I felt my pulse start to race. My hands trembled against the counter, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. This can't be right," I whispered. "I didn't make any of these transactions." Jasmine bit her lip. "Would you like to speak with a manager, ma'am?" I nodded slowly, afraid that if I spoke again, my voice would crack. She led me to a small office in the corner, where a middle-aged man in a navy suit introduced himself as Mr. Price, the branch manager. He shook my hand politely, but when he saw my face, he gestured for me to sit. "Mrs. Hayes, what seems to be the problem?" I explained what I'd seen the second account, the withdrawals, the confusion. He pulled the records up on his own computer, his expression neutral and professional. After a few minutes, he looked up. "Yes, ma'am. This account was opened in 2017. Joint ownership between you and your son. There have been regular transactions since then." "I never opened this account," I said firmly. "I didn't sign any papers for it." He turned the screen toward me again. "Well, according to our records, this is your signature." And there it was. My name, Linda Hayes, scribbled in blue ink on a scanned document. Except it wasn't mine. It looked close enough to fool someone who didn't know my handwriting. But I knew it. I knew the way my L loops, the way my D leans slightly to the right. This one was too neat, too careful. My stomach turned. That's not my signature. He looked uneasy. Mrs. Hayes, if you believe this was opened fraudulently, we can initiate an internal investigation. Would you like to file a report? I stared at the paper, at my son's name next to mine, at the trail of numbers that represented years of savings, David's insurance money, my retirement fund, the future we'd built together. Yes, I said quietly. File it. He nodded and began typing, but my mind had already drifted somewhere far away. Memory started flashing the way Mark always insisted on handling things himself. The times he said, "Don't worry about it, Mom." The passwords I never saw. Pieces started fitting together in a way I didn't want them to. The new car, the trips, the excuses. He'd been taking the money all along from an account I didn't even know existed. When Mr. Price finished, he gave me a copy of the report and suggested I freeze my accounts. He also recommended I contact a lawyer, just in case. I thanked him, walked out of the bank, and sat in my car. For a long time, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, feeling empty. The kind of emptiness that comes when you realize your whole world might have been a lie. I thought of Mark as a little boy, sitting at the kitchen table doing math homework, his face scrunched up in concentration while David helped him with fractions. I thought of Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduations, every moment I'd looked at him and thought, that's my son, my pride. And now, all I could think was, why? Wasn't I enough? Didn't he already have his own life, his own success? Why did he need to take from me from the mother who would have given him everything if he just asked? I finally started the car and drove home, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry, not yet. The shock was too heavy, like a stone pressing against my chest. When I got home, the first thing I did was pull out my old files, the ones David and I kept in a box labeled financials. I checked old bank statements, insurance records, everything. There was no mention of a second account. Nothing. That meant one thing. Mark must have opened it after David died. He waited until I was grieving, vulnerable, dependent, and then he moved in quietly, disguised as a helpful son. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by papers, the ticking of the wall clock growing louder and louder until it was the only sound in the room. When the truth finally sank in, I broke. Not loud sobbing, just quiet, helpless tears that slipped down my face as I whispered to no one, "How could you do this to me, Mark?" It wasn't about the money. It was about trust. About the sacred bond between a mother and her child, a bond I thought was unbreakable. I must have sat there for hours, staring at the papers. Eventually, I stood up, wiped my face, and went to the mirror. What I saw staring back at me wasn't the fragile widow I used to be. It was a woman who'd been lied to, stolen from, and humiliated, and something inside her was changing. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation with Mark. Every time he brushed me off. Every time he used that soft, reassuring voice to hide what he was really doing. And by morning, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. He'd stolen my money, but I wasn't going to let him steal my dignity. The night I confronted Mark was one of the hardest nights of my life. Not because I didn't know what I was going to say, but because I knew deep down that whatever happened after that night, nothing between us would ever be the same again. I spent the whole day in silence, pacing through my house like a ghost. The air felt heavy, thick with all the things I hadn't said for years. Every photo on the wall, every memory of him growing up, felt like a lie now. There was one picture that hurt the most, Mark at 16. Holding his high school diploma, grinning ear to ear. and me beside him, proud, arm around his shoulder. I used to love that photo. Now, it made my chest ache. By evening, I'd made my decision. I would look him in the eye and make him tell me the truth. I texted him at 4:12 p.m. "Hey, sweetheart, are you free for dinner tonight? I made your favorite roast chicken and mashed potatoes." He replied a few minutes later, as casually as ever. "Sure, Mom. I'll be there around 7. I stared at the screen, wondering if he had any idea what was waiting for him. At 6, I started setting the table, the same table we'd eaten at since he was a child. I put out his favorite glass, folded the napkin the way he liked it, everything just right. Not because I wanted him to be comfortable, but because I wanted no excuses, no distractions. At 7:03, I heard his car pull into the driveway, the sound of his keys, his footsteps on the porch, the door opening. "Hey, Mom," he called out, his tone light, easy. He looked the same, confident, smiling, wearing a tailored jacket, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. "Something smells amazing." I smiled faintly. "Dinner's ready." We sat down, and for a few minutes, everything looked normal. He talked about work, traffic, some friend who bought a house in Austin. I nodded, smiled, answered where I needed to. But I wasn't really listening. Every word out of his mouth felt like a performance. When he reached for the gravy boat, I said quietly, "Mark, I went to the bank yesterday." He froze for half a second, then forced a casual laugh. "Oh yeah? Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "Everything's fine, except I found another account with my name on it." That was the moment I saw it, a flicker in his eyes. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. Fear, guilt, recognition. He set the gravy down slowly. "Oh, that one. Yeah, that's just one of your savings accounts, Mom. Remember? I told you I opened one to manage your investments." I looked straight at him. "No, Mark, you didn't tell me, not once." He leaned back, giving me that charming half smile he'd always used to get his way. "Mom, it's fine. You're just misunderstanding how it works. I set it up years ago to help with your funds. You know how complicated things got after Dad passed." "I know exactly how things got after your father passed," I said, my voice firmer now. "That's when you started managing everything. And that's when the withdrawals started." The smile faded. "Withdrawals?" I reached down beside me and placed a printed statement on the table. "You've been taking money from that account for years. Thousands of dollars. Don't lie to me, Mark. I saw it." His expression shifted from surprise to annoyance quick, like a mask slipping. "Mom, you're making this sound worse than it is. That money wasn't stolen. It was for expenses, taxes, bills, things for the house." "Expenses?" I interrupted, my voice sharp now. $10,000 for what, exactly? You don't live here. You don't pay my bills. You drive a new car. You go on trips. And somehow my savings keep shrinking." "Mom, calm down." His tone hardened. "You're overreacting." Overreacting. That word cut through me like a knife. I had spent decades teaching children to speak the truth, to take responsibility, and here was my own son gaslighting me like I was some confused old woman. "Do not tell me to calm down," I said quietly. "You forged my signature, Mark. You opened that account in my name. You used my husband's insurance money, your father's, like it was your personal wallet." He laughed a short, bitter sound. "Oh, come on, Mom. You're acting like I robbed a stranger. It's family money. What's yours is mine, right?" I stared at him, trying to find the boy I raised somewhere behind that smug grin, but he was gone. The man sitting in front of me wasn't my son. He was a stranger wearing his face. "You don't get to say that," I said softly. You don't get to twist what family means to make your greed sound like love. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. You don't understand how hard I've worked for you. I handled everything, bills, taxes, paperwork, while you sat here doing nothing. I deserved something back. Something back? I repeated, rising to my feet. I gave you everything. Your education, your childhood, your home, your chance. You think you earned this by lying to me? By stealing from your mother? He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated, pacing. You're making this dramatic, Mom. I didn't steal. I borrowed. I was going to put it back. You wouldn't even have noticed if you hadn't gone digging. There it was, the confession, wrapped in justification. So you admit it, I said. He stopped pacing and looked at me, defiant. Yeah, fine. I took some money, but it's not like you needed it. You've got plenty left. Why can't you just drop it? The air between us went still. I could feel my heart pounding, but my voice came out steady. Because it's not about the money. It's about respect, about honesty, about the fact that you looked me in the eyes for years and lied without flinching. His jaw tightened. I did it for both of us, okay? I had debts, business issues, things you wouldn't understand. I didn't want to worry you. Don't you dare use that line, I snapped. You didn't want to worry me because you didn't want to get caught. We stood there, inches apart. Mother and son, two people bound by blood but divided by betrayal. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I said, You're going to fix this. He scoffed. And what? You'll call the police if I don't? You'd really do that to your own son? I met his gaze. You already did it to your own mother. Something in his face faltered, then the smallest flicker of guilt, maybe even fear. But it passed. He grabbed his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out of the house. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. When the sound faded, I sat down at the table. The food was cold now, untouched. The papers were still there, a silent witness to everything that had just happened. For a while, I just sat there, staring at them. My hands were shaking, my throat dry, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it echoing in the quiet room. It's strange you think the worst part of betrayal is discovering the lie, but it's not. The worst part is realizing the person you loved most isn't sorry. That night, I packed away every photo of Mark in the living room. Not out of hate, but because I couldn't look at his face and remember the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. That boy was gone. The man who stood in my kitchen was someone else entirely. The next morning, I called the bank manager, Mr. Price, and asked him to proceed with the fraud report. He told me the legal team would need more details, copies of my ID, proof of unauthorized signatures, statements. I gave them everything. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Amanda Reynolds, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt or judge. She just listened quietly, taking notes. When I finished, she said, Mrs. Hayes, I'm sorry, but we can build a case. This isn't just a misunderstanding. This is financial exploitation. The word hit me like a slap. Exploitation. That's what it was. Not bad luck, not mismanagement, exploitation of a mother's trust. Over the next few days, things moved fast. The lawyer contacted the bank, retrieved transaction histories, and even pulled surveillance footage from the branch where the account was opened. And there it was. On the grainy footage, Mark sitting across from a teller, signing forms with a steady hand, smiling like it was just another day. I watched that video 3 times, numb. Amanda asked, Do you want to press charges? I hesitated. I thought about all the years, all the love, all the sacrifices. The nights staying up with him when he was sick. The extra shifts I worked so he could go to college. Press charges? Against my own child? But then I thought of David, what he would say if he knew. He'd always told me, "Don't let anyone, not even family, make a fool of you, Linda." And I realized something. Protecting Mark from consequences wouldn't save him. It would destroy him further. So I said quietly, "Yes, I want to press charges." When the police contacted him a few weeks later, he called me furious, shouting through the phone, "How could you do this to me, Mom? You're ruining my life." I held the phone close and said calmly, "You ruined mine first." Then I hung up. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and questions. But through it all, something inside me changed. I started walking taller. I started paying attention to my finances, opening my own accounts, learning how to manage them myself. I wasn't the naive widow anymore. I was a woman rebuilding from the ashes of betrayal. The day of the court hearing, I sat in the front row. Mark walked in wearing a suit, looking smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in spirit. When his eyes met mine, he looked away. The judge read the evidence. Forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, misused funds. The case was clear. When the verdict came guilty of financial fraud and ordered restitution, I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and exhaled. It wasn't victory I felt, it was peace. Afterward, as people left the courtroom, Mark approached me. His voice was quiet, trembling. "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. I saw traces of the boy I raised, but also the man who betrayed me. "I hope you mean that," I said, "because this is the last time I'll believe your words without proof." Then I turned and walked away. That night, I sat on my porch under the stars, alone but calm. For the first time in years, I felt like I owned my life again. Not just my money, my decisions, my boundaries, my strength. Betrayal didn't break me. It revealed who I really was. And from that day forward, I promised myself one thing. No one, not even the people I love, will ever make me small again. The morning after our confrontation, I woke up before sunrise. For years, I had relied on Mark for everything: financial, taxes, bank statements, insurance renewals. I'd gotten so used to the idea that he'd take care of it that I'd forgotten how to take care of myself. But that morning, something inside me shifted. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and spread out every paper I could find: old checkbooks, bank letters, my husband's will, insurance documents. The stack looked overwhelming, but I forced myself to start reading line by line. I wanted to understand. I needed to understand. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was an investigator of my own life. At first, I didn't even know where to begin. The numbers didn't make sense, so many accounts, transfers, withdrawals. I didn't recognize half the statements. I called the bank later that morning, using the same branch where I'd first discovered the hidden account. When the teller recognized my name, she transferred me to the branch manager, a woman named Clara. Her voice was calm and respectful. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry about what you're going through. We can schedule a meeting and review everything together." I drove there within the hour. Inside that small office, surrounded by glass walls and the faint smell of printer ink, Clara handed me a folder thicker than my husband's old tax files. She explained everything: account, creation dates, online access, linked devices. Each fact was like a knife twisting deeper. The worst part? Every signature on those forms was mine. But they weren't. I knew my handwriting. Mark had practiced it once in high school, forging a permission slip. I remembered scolding him for it. telling him that lies start small. I never thought that lesson would come back to haunt me 20 years later. Clara paused and said softly, "Mrs. Hayes, we see this kind of situation more often than you'd think. Family members sometimes take advantage when they manage finances. Would you like me to refer you to our fraud department?" Fraud. That word made my stomach twist. It didn't feel like fraud. It felt like betrayal wearing a suit. But I nodded. The next few days were a blur of appointments, forms, and quiet tears. The fraud investigator confirmed what I already suspected. Mark had opened the additional account under my name, transferred funds from my main savings, and slowly withdrawn large sums over the past 8 years. Not in big chunks that would have been too obvious, but in small, careful amounts. $1,200 here, $3,500 there. Enough to look like expenses or bills. He was smart, calculated, and worst of all, he had done it knowing I trusted him completely. When the investigator slid the summary report across the table, I stared at the total number. $73,426. I felt my breath leave my body. That money wasn't just digits, it was the life insurance my husband left me, the safety net he'd built with 40 years of labor. My hands trembled as I said, "He took my husband's legacy, is the sentence clan of the feeder." The investigator met my eyes and said quietly, "You can press charges, Mrs. Hayes, or we can approach this through a civil recovery. That's your decision." I left without answering. That night, I sat in my husband's old armchair and thought about everything. The memories of Mark as a boy, his first baseball game, the time he cried when his goldfish died, the nights he fell asleep on my lap while I read to him. How could that same boy have looked me in the eyes and lied? My mind went back to the day of our confrontation, the way he had said it's a misunderstanding without a hint of shame, that look of annoyance, not guilt. He hadn't been scared of being caught, he was angry that I found out. And that made my choice clear. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Diane Miller, a sharp, confident woman in her 40s, who specialized in financial elder abuse. She listened quietly as I told my story, occasionally taking notes, occasionally shaking her head. When I finished, she leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Hayes, I'm going to be honest with you. What your son did isn't just wrong, it's criminal. But more than that, it's emotional manipulation. He used your trust against you." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. She continued, "You have 2 options. You can file criminal charges, he could face time, a record, maybe even prison. Or you can pursue civil action to recover the funds, keeping it out of the headlines. It depends on what kind of justice you want." I looked at her for a long moment and said, "I want the kind that teaches him a lesson he'll never forget, but I don't want to destroy him. I just want him to understand what he's done." Diane smiled faintly. "Then let's start with recovery. But if he refuses to cooperate, we escalate." Over the next few weeks, Diane and her team gathered evidence. Bank statements, digital trails, forged signatures, everything. She told me that since the account was under my name, the bank would likely freeze it until ownership was settled. Mark called me 3 times during that period. I didn't answer. On the 4th call, I picked up. His voice was tight, irritated. "Mom, what's going on?" "The bank froze the account. My credit card stopped working. Did you do something?" "I didn't do anything," I said quietly. "You did." He laughed bitterly. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting. I helped you. You wouldn't even have half that money if it wasn't for me." "Helped me?" I said, my voice trembling. "You helped yourself to my husband's savings. You used me." There was a long silence. Then he snapped, "You don't understand how money works, Mom. You'd just waste it. I was managing it better than you ever could." That sentence broke something inside me. I whispered, "You stole my husband's love for me," and called it management. Then I hung up. A week later, Diane sent him a formal demand letter, giving him 30 days to repay the full amount or face legal action. Instead of paying, Mark hired his own lawyer, and that's when I realized how deep his arrogance ran. His lawyer claimed that all transactions were authorized and that I had given him financial power of attorney. But that document had expired years ago, after my husband's death. I had never renewed it. They underestimated me. For the first time in years, I didn't shrink back. I showed up to every meeting, reviewed every paper, and asked questions until I understood everything. When Diane explained how Mark had routed transfers through his own investment account, I told her to subpoena it. When she said it might be difficult to prove intent, I pulled out handwritten notes Mark had left me about transfers for tax purposes. I saved everything. I became meticulous, almost obsessed, but it gave me strength. I wasn't fighting just for money. I was fighting for the version of myself that my husband once believed in. The day of the mediation, Mark walked into the conference room in an expensive suit, acting like he was the victim. He wouldn't look at me. He kept saying to his lawyer, "This is all just a family misunderstanding." I stayed silent until it was my turn to speak. Then I looked directly at him and said, "A misunderstanding is when someone forgets your birthday. What you did is betrayal. You didn't just take money, you took trust, and you can't give that back." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something on his face. Not guilt, not regret, but fear. Diane laid out the evidence like a neatly drawn map of his greed. Every withdrawal, every forged document, every false statement. By the time she finished, even his lawyer looked uncomfortable. The mediator turned to him and said, "Mr. Hayes, this is serious. You could face criminal charges." Mark's voice cracked when he said, "I never meant to hurt her, but I knew better." He didn't mean to get caught. He finally agreed to a settlement, full repayment with interest over time, and a written confession for the record. Diane made sure it was ironclad. When I left that office, I didn't feel victory. I felt relief. It wasn't about punishing him anymore. It was about reclaiming the life I had almost surrendered out of trust. Over the next months, the repayments started coming in small amounts. I opened a new account in my name only, with no one else authorized. I learned how to manage online banking, budgeting, even investments. Diane introduced me to a financial advisor who helped me rebuild. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: control. Mark tried calling me a few times after the settlement, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to forgive, and maybe I never would be. But one thing was certain. I would never let anyone, not even my own son, manage my life again. Sometimes at night, I still sit in my husband's armchair, the house quiet around me, and I think about what justice really means. It's not revenge. It's not punishment. It's balance, setting things right where they went wrong. Mark learned that money can't buy integrity, and I learned that trust, once broken, doesn't heal. It transforms you. I became stronger, smarter, independent. I may have lost my son in the process, but I found myself again. And for the first time since my husband died, I could finally say the words out loud without trembling. I can take care of myself. It's strange how silence can feel different once you've reclaimed it. After the storm, the confrontation, the lawyers, the truth I expected, peace to arrive like sunshine after rain. But it didn't. It came slowly, like dawn breaking behind heavy clouds, inch by inch. For the first time in years, My house was truly mine again. No one had the keys but me. No one was logging into my accounts. No one was telling me what I should or shouldn't worry about. It was quiet, but it was my quiet. I remember the first morning after the settlement. I woke up, opened the curtains, and just stood there, watching the light spill across the living room. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone's dependent. I didn't feel like a fragile widow or an aging mother. I felt like a woman with her own life, even if I was starting from scratch. I made myself breakfast, just one plate, one cup, one chair at the table. I didn't cry. I didn't replay old conversations in my head. I just ate my toast, drank my coffee, and checked my bank account. And when I saw that balance, the one under my name only, I smiled. It wasn't much, not compared to what had been stolen, but it represented something bigger. Every dollar there was earned, protected, and watched over by me. A few weeks later, Diane, my lawyer, called to check in. She asked if I was considering pressing criminal charges after all. I told her no, not because I didn't have the right I did, but because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life tangled in bitterness. I said, I don't want to be the woman who spends her final years chasing punishment. I want to be the one who found freedom. She understood. Then you already won, she said before hanging up. That night, I thought about her words. You already won. It didn't feel like victory at first. Justice rarely feels like celebration. It's quiet. It's the kind of win you carry inside your chest. Invisible but steady. Over the next months, I built a new rhythm. I took a financial literacy course at the community center. Most of the other students were in their 20s, but I didn't care. I sat in the front row, taking notes, asking questions. The young instructor once told me, "You remind me of my mom, determined but gentle." I laughed and said, I've learned the hard way that gentle isn't the same as naive. Every week, I grew a little stronger. I learned how to budget, how to invest, how to read bank statements without feeling confused. I even bought myself a small laptop, my first personal device in years. It felt symbolic, like reclaiming the tools of my independence. One day, I logged into my account and saw the final repayment from Mark. The transaction note read, simply, paid in full. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Paid in full. It should have felt satisfying, but instead it brought tears. Because the debt wasn't just financial, it was emotional. There are some balances no one can ever repay. I didn't speak to Mark for nearly 6 months after that. Not a single call, text, or email. But one afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was his. My heart tightened as I opened it. It wasn't long, just 2 pages. He wrote that he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt me, that he got carried away trying to control everything after Dad died. He said he thought he was helping, but admitted he knew what he was doing was wrong. At the end, he wrote, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm still your son. I hope one day we can talk. I folded the letter and set it on my nightstand. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, relief, maybe all of it. That night, I lay awake thinking about motherhood, about how we're conditioned to forgive, no matter what. How society tells women like me that being a good mother means endless patience and unconditional love. But love doesn't mean allowing someone to walk all over you. Sometimes love means stepping back. Sometimes love means saying, no more. The next morning, I wrote him a letter in return. I didn't tear into him or write about pain. I just told him the truth. Mark, I raised you to be kind, honest, and accountable. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that. What you did broke something between us that can't be repaired with money. I still love you because I'm your mother, but I also love myself now. And I won't let you use that love against me again. When you're ready to be my son, not my caretaker or my manipulator, my door will be open." I mailed it the same day, and that, I realized, was the true moment of victory, not the lawsuit, not the money, not even the independence. It was the courage to speak truth without fear. Months passed, and life moved on quietly. I started volunteering twice a week at the local library. They put me in charge of helping seniors navigate technology, paying bills online, recognizing scams, managing accounts. I never told them my story, but every time I helped someone set a new password or learn how to track their expenses, I felt a small surge of pride. One woman, in her 70s, hugged me once and said, "You're so patient. You must have a wonderful family." I smiled politely. "I had to learn patience the hard way," I said. It wasn't bitterness, it was acceptance. My story had changed me, but it hadn't broken me. On my 63rd birthday, I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd confronted my son a year earlier. The evening light poured through the window, golden and soft. I poured myself a glass of wine, not for celebration, but for reflection. I looked around the room at the modest but warm home, the neat stack of bills I managed myself, the quiet peace in every corner. It wasn't a grand victory, but it was mine. I whispered to the empty room, "I did it, Robert." My husband's name still felt comforting on my tongue. I took care of myself, just like you wanted me to. And for the first time in a long while, I felt proud of the woman staring back at me from the reflection in the window. A few weeks later, Mark called. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. His voice was softer than I remembered. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Mark. I got your letter," he said. "And you're right. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm trying to be better." There was a pause. I could hear the sincerity this time, not the arrogance, not the defensiveness. Just a quiet man who finally saw his mistakes. "I'm glad you're trying," I said. "But rebuilding trust isn't easy." "I know," he whispered. "Maybe one day we can start again?" "Maybe," I said, "but it has to be on new terms. You'll visit as my son, not my accountant." He laughed softly, a broken kind of laugh. "Deal." When I hung up, I didn't feel anger or pain, I felt peace. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the weight that no longer serves you. Today, I live simply. I pay my bills, water my plants, and take morning walks by the lake. Some days, I still think about what happened, about trust, love, and the line between the two. But mostly, I think about how strong I became when I was forced to stand alone. People assume independence means freedom from others. But for me, independence means freedom from fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of losing love. I've learned that when you stop fearing loss, you gain everything. There's a small framed quote on my wall now. It says, "Sometimes the people you trust the most teach you how to trust yourself." It's not there as a reminder of betrayal, but of growth. Because that's what my story became, not a tale of greed or justice, but a journey towards self-respect. Mark may always carry the guilt of what he did, but I carry something much more powerful, the knowledge that I can rebuild, even when the foundation has cracked. I survived betrayal. I survived disappointment, and I came out stronger. When I check my bank account today and see my name alone, I smile. Not because of the money, but because it stands for something more. Ownership of my life. I'm 63 now. I still cook dinner for one. I still walk alone sometimes, but I am not lonely. I'm at peace. I don't need anyone to manage my world for me, because now finally I know exactly what my worth is, and no one, not even my own son, will ever take that away from me again.